Today, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about storytelling as a distinct type of communication, something that's different than other forms like interpersonal communication or argumentation. Now, sure, with a story, you might be able to persuade an audience member. You might be able to entertain an audience member, and those might be great things to do with that story. But the purpose of storytelling, what makes it a unique communicative act, is the fact that stories are about sharing experience. So today I want to talk a little bit about how that happens and about why we might want to tell stories. Walter Benjamin once said that the role of the storyteller is to take human experience, either experiences that they've had or experiences from others, and to share those experiences so that they become something useful for the audience. There are three elements at play here for Benjamin: the soul, the eye, and the hand. We'll start with the eye. The eye is this idea that I go out and I experience the world, and I talk to others, and I learn from others. The soul is the ability to understand those experiences that others share with me and my own experiences, to take time and critically reflect on them. And finally, the hand is this idea that storytelling is not an art form, it's a craft where I shape that experience into something useful for my audience. So, craft, not an art form. Now, don't get me wrong, storytellers can levitate the craft into an art form, and they often do. But it's the same as a woodworker making a table. A talented woodworker could be an artisan. They could create a beautiful table. But as beautiful as that table might be, it still is a table and it still serves the function as a table. And any yokel with a saw and a hammer and some nails and a few pieces of wood can probably put together a table that you could rest the book on top of, and that book is going to stay right where you left it. That is the purpose of the table. Sure, the artisan table might look really nice. It might be something you'd like to have in your home, whereas the simple craftsman's table might not be much to look at, but it still works. It still serves the purpose. And that's what storytelling is. You can raise it to the art form, but you don't have to for your stories to be useful. So let me give you an example with a story. This is a story about truth and story. So once upon a time, Truth wakes up. He gets out of bed, he goes and brushes his teeth, eats some breakfast, and heads out the door. Now, as he was leaving his house, he had this nagging feeling like he kind of forgot something, but he couldn't figure out what it was, and he was like, whatever, it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining, the sky is clear, the birds are singing, I'm going out and I'm going to enjoy this town. And as he's walking around, he's waving at his neighbors, saying hi to everyone, goes, tries to pet a dog or two, but every time he tries to interact with someone, they just ignore him. Or worse yet, they start to turn away and move away from him. And at first, he can deal with this, but eventually, I mean, like, come on, that's awful. And he starts to wonder, what did I do wrong? Do I smell? He doesn't smell bad because he showered this morning, and so he couldn't figure it out. And so finally, he went to a park, and of course, there was no one at the park because as soon as they saw him, they all ran away. And he sat down on a bench and he put his head in his hands and thought, what did I do? Why don't people want to have anything to do with me today? And he couldn't understand it. Well, who should walk up but Story? Now, Story was dressed to the nines. I mean, she always looks fabulous, but today, I mean, like, she had this silver sequin vest on over this beautiful flowing purple shirt with a purple velvet top hat to match. She had some flared out bell bottom pants and some really awesome high heel boots. And she looks up at Truth and she's like, Truth, what's happening here? Why so glum? And Truth looks up at Story and he says, I don't know. Everyone I talked to today has completely ignored me. You're the only person that has said a single word to me today. And Story looked down at Truth and she said, I think I know the problem. Because she realized what Truth did not realize. The one thing that he forgot to do when he left his house was Truth forgot to get dressed. And she looked at him and she said, no one likes looking at the naked truth. And Truth said, oh. I did forget to get dressed. But Story had a plan. She said, "Why don't you come back to my house? You can pick some clothes out of my closet. You'll look fantastic, and then we'll go out and we'll have conversations." And Truth said, "Thank you." And they went to Story's house. She decked him out so he looked almost as good as she did. And the two of them start wandering around the town, and everyone wants to talk to Truth, and everyone wants to talk to Story. And so Story held back for a moment just to see how Truth did on his own. And as Truth was wearing Story's clothes everywhere he went, people wanted to talk to him. So Truth knew from that day on, if he wanted to have good conversations, if he wanted to meet with people, and if he wanted to share his ideas with others, it would do him well to wear a few of Story's clothes. So we can return to those three elements, the soul, the eye, and the hand. Now, as far as the eye goes, this is a story that I first heard from the storyteller Joseph Sobel. And it resonated with me because it comes from the Jewish tradition. I am Jewish, and there's a lot of comedic elements there that I really enjoy playing with. Regarding the soul, again, because I like playing with those elements, it really spoke to me. I connected to it, I understand it, and it's an easy way for me to explain to others why truth matters, but why truth can be hard to deliver to people, especially when they're not inclined to listen to it or to want to see it. And finally, the hand. I was able to craft that story into something that I hope is useful for my audience. I take myself out of it and think, who's going to be listening to this? Who's going to be watching this? And who needs to hear this story? The point here is that as useful as the storyteller might find the story for themselves, the story is not for them, but for their audience. And so the storyteller has to find a way to bridge that gap between what matters to them and what they think will matter to the audience. So at this point, you're probably starting to get an idea of why stories matter. I mean, just think about our everyday life, the barrage of information that we're constantly under and trying to make sense of that, let alone where we are in the whole scheme of things. And we often turn to narrative as a way to explain or understand that experience. If someone does something awful to you, how do we react to that? How do we respond to it? What does that tell us about human nature? And so there's two kind of approaches here, right? So on the one hand, we could say that, well, everything, there's a divine reason. There's some sort of divine force guiding us. And if we just understood their plan, then we would know what to do with our lives. And so we tell stories as a way to try to understand what's happening and where we sit within the whole divine realm. But on the other side, you might say, well, there's no divine being guiding anything. There's no rhyme or reason to all of this. Life is just chaos. Well, sure, and it might be chaotic, but we still have to do something with chaos. And what we do is we turn it into a story because that way it has meaning to us and we can then share it with others. Let me give you an example. This is the story of the scorpion and the frog. Now, once upon a time, Scorpion was walking home, and all of a sudden he felt the earth shake, and he looked up and saw a giant boulder fall down right into the entrance of his cave. And he tried to push the boulder, but he's a little scorpion. This was a giant rock. He couldn't get it to budge, and he said, "Oh, man, I need to find a new place to live." And so he wandered down the side of the river and went on and on and on and just could not find anything. But on the other side of the river, he saw an amazing looking cave with no big boulders around. And he said, "Wow, I want to live there." But he was a scorpion. He couldn't swim, and so he needed a ride across the river. And so he went and sought out Frog. And he went up to Frog and he said, "Well, hello, Frog. How would you like to carry me across the river?" And Frog looked at Scorpion and said, "No way. That's not happening." And Scorpion said, "Why?" And Frog said, "Because you're a scorpion. As soon as we're getting across the river, you're going to stick me in my back and I will die." And Scorpion looked at Frog and said, "Why on earth would I do that? If I killed you in the middle of the river, I can't swim. I would die too." And Frog thought that there was some logic to this. And Frog was a helpful person, so he decided that he was going to help Scorpion out. Maybe he'll make a new friend out of this. And so Scorpion hops onto Frog's back, and they swim out to the middle of the river. And sure enough, they get halfway across the river, and Frog feels a large poke in his back. And he says, "Scorpion, what have you done? You've killed us both." And Scorpion said, "I know. I'm sorry. It's just who I am." And that was the end of the scorpion and the frog. The lesson there is pretty obvious. We are rooted in our ways, and it is really difficult, if not impossible, to change who we are at our core. But we can look at that story differently. So let's see version B of that. We'll pick up in the middle. And so they're swimming across the river and they make it to the other side. Scorpion hops off Frog's back and he says, "Thank you so much. You have no idea how helpful you've been." And he went to his new home and he loved it. And from that day on, he and Frog, Scorpion and Frog, became really close friends. Yeah, that second story is a little bit more complex. Rather than saying that people are who they are, this one focuses on the fact that we might have stereotypes about people and who they are, and maybe if we got to know them and help them out a little bit, we might realize that things are actually quite different. In my next lecture, I will talk a little bit more about why it's necessary for us to tell stories not just for others, but why it might be necessary for ourselves. Thanks for watching.